Christa Worthington was an American fashion writer, journalist, and author, known for her work with renowned publications such as Women's Wear Daily, Cosmopolitan, Yale, Harper's Bazaar, and the New York Times. Born on December 23, 1956, she was raised in a well-educated and affluent family with deep roots in Massachusetts. Worthington grew up in Hingham, a picturesque town on the South Shore, and later attended Vassar College, one of the top liberal arts institutions in the United States, where she developed a passion for writing and fashion. She began her career as a journalist in New York City, quickly establishing herself in the competitive world of fashion reporting. Her sharp insights and deep understanding of style trends made her a respected name in the industry. Over the years, she wrote extensively about fashion, culture, and design, contributing to some of the most influential magazines of the time. Worthington's career was not limited to magazine features. She also co-authored several books on fashion, where she explored the evolving trends, iconic designers, and the cultural impact of fashion on society. Despite her success, Worthington eventually grew tired of the fast-paced, high-pressure environment of New York's fashion scene and sought a quieter life. She decided to move to Truro, a small town on Cape Cod, Massachusetts, where she could focus on her writing in a more peaceful setting. Truro, known for its coastal beauty and artistic community, seemed like the perfect place for a fresh start. In Truro, Worthington led a more private and introspective life, shifting her focus from fashion journalism to freelance writing and enjoying the simple pleasures of small-town living. She had a daughter, Ava, whom she loved dearly, and was devoted to raising her in a nurturing environment. However, her life took a tragic turn when she was brutally murdered in her home on January 6, 2002. The case shocked the quiet town and quickly gained national attention due to the horrific circumstances. Worthington was found stabbed to death, and her 2-year-old daughter, Ava, was discovered clinging to her lifeless body, unharmed but alone for hours before being rescued. The murder investigation became one of Cape Cod's most high-profile criminal cases, with numerous theories and speculations emerging about who could have committed such a heinous act. After years of investigation, law enforcement arrested Christopher McCowan, a local garbage collector, on April 15, 2005. The trial was intense, drawing media coverage from across the country. In November 2006, McCowan was found guilty of first-degree murder, rape, and burglary, and was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. However, controversy surrounded the verdict, as 3 jurors later alleged that racism had influenced the deliberations, leading to legal challenges and appeals. Despite these efforts, the Massachusetts Supreme Judicial Court ultimately denied McCowan's request for a new trial in December 2010. Worthington's murder left a lasting impact on the community and the fashion world, as many mourned the loss of a talented journalist and devoted mother. Her legacy as a writer remains in the pages of the publications she contributed to, and her story continues to be remembered as one of the most tragic and gripping true crime cases in modern history. Christa Worthington's death remains one of the most shocking and widely discussed crimes in Cape Cod's history. On January 6, 2002, her body was discovered inside her remote Truro home, lying on the floor with her 2-year-old daughter, Ava, clinging to her lifeless body. She had been brutally stabbed, and an autopsy later confirmed that she had been sexually assaulted before her murder. The crime sent shockwaves through the small, quiet town of Truro, a community where violent crime was virtually unheard of. Worthington, a successful fashion journalist who had written for publications like Women's Wear Daily, Cosmopolitan, Yale, Harper's Bazaar, and the New York Times, had left behind the glamour of New York City to live a more peaceful life in Truro, raising her daughter as a single mother. However, that peaceful life came to a horrific end when an unknown assailant attacked her in her own home. The timeline leading up to her murder remains somewhat unclear, but investigators pieced together the events as best as they could. On the evening of January 5, 2002, Worthington was believed to be at home with Ava. She had no known plans to meet anyone, and there were no immediate signs of forced entry into her house. The following morning, a neighbor discovered her body after realizing something was wrong. It was an image that would haunt the community, a defenseless 2-year-old clinging to her mother's cold, lifeless body, confused and alone. The sight of Ava unharmed but traumatized by what had occurred was heartbreaking, and it intensified the urgency to solve the crime. The autopsy results revealed grim details. Worthington had been sexually assaulted and then stabbed in the chest. The attack appeared to have been sudden and violent, suggesting she had been taken by surprise. There were no clear indications of a struggle beyond the immediate violence of the attack, which led investigators to suspect that she may have known her killer or that he had caught her completely off guard. Despite the brutality of the crime scene itself offered limited clues. There were no immediate signs of forced entry, and nothing appeared to be stolen, ruling out a robbery gone wrong. This deepened the mystery, as it suggested that the killer's primary intent had been to harm Worthington rather than steal from her. The murder investigation quickly became one of the most high-profile cases in Massachusetts. Law enforcement officers from both the local police department and the state police worked tirelessly to track down leads. Given that Worthington had once been part of New York's fashion world, some speculated whether someone from her past might have been responsible. However, as investigators looked into her relationships, it became clear that the suspect was likely someone closer to home. Over the years, Worthington had been involved in several personal relationships, some of which had been complicated. She had previously been in a relationship with Tim Arnold, a fisherman and the father of her daughter, but they had since separated. Another former lover, Tony Jackett, a married man with whom she had an affair, was also investigated. Jackett had fathered Ava, but despite the complexities of their relationship, there was no concrete evidence linking him to the crime. As months passed without an arrest, frustration grew. The case seemed to be at a standstill, with investigators struggling to find solid evidence to move forward. The pressure to solve the case intensified, especially as media outlets began covering the story extensively. The image of little Ava, now motherless, only added to the public's emotional investment in finding the killer. Then, in 2005, 3 years after Worthington's murder, a breakthrough finally came. Advances in forensic testing allowed investigators to reanalyze DNA evidence found at the crime scene. The results pointed to Christopher McCowan, a local garbage collector who had worked in the area and was familiar with Worthington's home. McCowan was arrested on April 15, 2005, and charged with rape and murder. His arrest shocked the community, as he had not been a primary suspect early in the investigation. However, as law enforcement dug deeper into his past, they found troubling signs. He had a history of violence, and witnesses recalled him making inappropriate comments about women. McCowan initially denied any involvement, but when confronted with the DNA evidence, he changed his story multiple times. At one point, he claimed that he and Worthington had consensual sex, but that someone else had killed her. However, this explanation did not align with the forensic evidence, which indicated that the sexual encounter had been non-consensual and that Worthington had been attacked shortly afterward. The trial, which began in 2006, was one of the most closely watched in Massachusetts at the time. Prosecutors presented a compelling case, using DNA evidence to place McCowan at the scene of the crime. They argued that he had assaulted Worthington and then killed her in an attempt to cover up the crime. The defense, on the other hand, suggested that McCowan had been framed or that he was being unfairly targeted due to his race. The jury ultimately found him guilty of first-degree murder, rape, and burglary on November 16, 2006. He was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. However, even after the conviction, the case remained controversial. In 2008, allegations of racial bias among the jurors surfaced. 3 jurors came forward, claiming that racism had influenced deliberations, raising concerns about whether McCowan had received a fair trial. A hearing was held to investigate these claims, but ultimately, the Massachusetts Supreme Judicial Court upheld the conviction in December 2010. Despite the legal challenges and lingering debates over the fairness of the trial, McCowan remains in prison, serving a life sentence for the brutal crime. Christa Worthington's murder left a lasting impact on her community and beyond. For those who knew her personally, it was an unthinkable tragedy, the loss of a brilliant journalist, a devoted mother, and a woman who had so much more to give. For the town of Truro, it was a chilling reminder that even in the most idyllic places, darkness can exist. Her daughter, Ava, was raised by relatives and shielded from the details of her mother's murder for much of her childhood. Meanwhile, Worthington's story became the subject of books, documentaries, and crime series, as people remained fascinated by both her life and the circumstances of her death. The case continues to be studied by those interested in forensic science, criminal justice, and true crime. Some still question whether justice was truly served, while others see it as a case where DNA evidence was instrumental in identifying a killer. Regardless of where opinions fall, one thing remains certain. Christa Worthington's life was tragically cut short in a horrific act of violence, but her legacy as a talented writer and loving mother endures. Christa Worthington's life and tragic death remain one of the most haunting true crime cases in modern history. Her story is one of brilliance, ambition, and talent, cut short by a senseless act of violence. As a journalist, she was a force in the fashion industry, writing for some of the most prestigious magazines in the world. She had an eye for trends, a way with words, and a deep understanding of the ever-changing world of fashion. But beyond her career, she was also a mother, a woman who had chosen to leave behind the chaos of New York City for the quiet beauty of Cape Cod. She had dreams of raising her daughter in a peaceful environment, embracing a life away from the pressures of the industry she had once thrived in. However, fate had other plans, and her life came to a horrifying end on that cold January day in 2002. The impact of Christa Worthington's murder went far beyond the borders of Toronto. It became a case that gripped the entire nation, drawing the attention of true crime enthusiasts, legal analysts, and the general public alike. People were not only horrified by the brutality of the crime, but also deeply moved by the image of her 2-year-old daughter, Ava, left clinging to her mother's body. It was a tragedy that felt deeply personal to many. In the years following Worthington's death, her case became the subject of books, documentaries, and investigative reports. Journalists and crime writers dissected every aspect of the case, from her career and personal relationships to the police investigation and the controversial trial that followed. Some saw her story as a cautionary tale about trusting those around us, while others focused on the justice system and whether it had truly served its purpose. Even after Christopher McCowan's conviction, questions remained. The allegations of racial bias among the jurors raised concerns about the fairness of the trial, leading to heated debates about the role of prejudice in the courtroom. Some believed that McCowan was guilty beyond any doubt, while others wondered whether the investigation had been flawed or rushed in its pursuit of justice. Her daughter, Ava, was at the heart of this tragedy, an innocent child left motherless in an instant. While she was too young to understand what had happened at the time, her life was forever altered by that single act of brutality. Thankfully, she was taken in by family members who ensured that she was raised with love and support, shielding her from the darkness of her mother's story until she was old enough to process it. The town of Truro, once a quiet and serene coastal community, was also forever changed by the crime. The murder shattered the illusion of safety that had long defined the area. Residents, who had once left their doors unlocked without a second thought, found themselves living in fear. It was a stark realization that violence could reach even the most unexpected places. For years, people in Truro struggled to move on, haunted by the memory of what had happened to one of their own. Even in the broader world of journalism and fashion, Worthington's death was deeply felt. Colleagues and friends mourned the loss of a writer who had contributed so much to the industry. She had been a voice in fashion, someone who understood its nuances and could translate them into compelling stories. Her work remains a testament to her talent, a reminder of what she accomplished in her lifetime. Those who knew her personally remember her not just for her career, but for her wit, intelligence, and the love she had for her daughter. Though the case has been legally resolved, Worthington's story remains open-ended in many ways. She was a woman of ambition, intelligence, and creativity. She lived a life full of accomplishments and experiences, touching the worlds of journalism, fashion, and literature. Her journey from the fast-paced streets of New York to the quiet shores of Cape Cod was one of self-discovery, a pursuit of something more meaningful than the fleeting glamour of the fashion industry. She was a mother who loved her daughter, a writer who left her mark on the world, and a woman whose story, though tragic, continues to resonate. Perhaps the true takeaway from Christa Worthington's story is the reminder to cherish life's moments, to be aware of the unexpected turns it can take, and to remember those who have been lost not just for how they died, but for how they lived. Her name, forever linked to one of Cape Cod's most infamous crimes, is also linked to her work, her achievements, and the love she had for her child. While the tragedy of her murder will never be forgotten, neither should the brilliance and passion with which she lived.